So, talking about entrepreneurship, you have your own venture called On Your Sparks, where you guide, young entrepreneurs, aspiring entrepreneurs. And so, if someone has a question that they've been planning on a venture since a year now, and they've already, planned out everything, they want to start it, and they realize that a big firm, like, a very big firm, has already established a similar venture on a very huge scale, and which would kill their customers. I mean, they wouldn't get customers if a very big, I wouldn't like to name, but a very big firm already has a similar model. I mean, this has happened with me in the past. I have been planning, it's a personal question. I've been planning on a lot of things. And then later, after a few months, I realized that, oh, okay, it's already established now recently by XYZ firm, and I cannot in any circumstance compete with that. So, what is your advice to such a problem?
So first of all, it's important to acknowledge that when you come up with an idea, there's 15 other people across the world that is coming up with the same idea. So as much as you want those special brownie points for coming up with it and you think it's amazing and nobody has ever done it, it's only a matter of time. There's usually two reasons why people haven't done it. One, somebody genuinely hasn't done it, which means they are going to do it. You are not the only person. And second, there is something lacking in that industry or market which has prohibited people from going in that space in the first place. But for your question, we'll focus on the first bit. If you come up with an idea, you don't get points for coming up with the idea. The execution also, the executor is the winner. But there's a deeper problem to what you described, which is somebody else did come up with the idea, which just goes to show that if it is that easily replicable, or if someone else can come up with it, then it was bound to happen in a matter of time anyway, which is why you have to come up with USPs, which is unique selling propositions that me and Mr. Tata also look for in a deck. Unique selling propositions prohibit another entrepreneur or another company from copying or creating what you have in mind. If those USPs are strong enough, then you can survive until at least you execute. Examples of USPs are not just some kind of patents, but for example, an understanding of the industry, for example, which took you 6 months to go out and talk to people. If you come up with an idea, you talk to 6 months to people, and you have customer insights. And then I come after 6 months with the same idea. You have a lead time of 6 months on me, which is at that point your USP. You are the first mover in the industry.
So, but what if you're competing with a big, already established firm,
correct.
like a huge giant?
Getting to that, that's just unfortunate because they executed first. It's just bad timing. If it was a second tier player who was not a big firm, it's easy. But you have to be very humble in acknowledging that if a big firm with greater infrastructure, greater resources, and greater amount of money has entered that space, it's very easy for them to knock you out, and you haven't even entered the space. So that's even worse. If you were an existing customer, existing startup, and you are reaching success with your unique idea, you're still small, and then the big player comes in, you still have a fighting chance, because the end result is not just that they will knock you off, but they try to acquire you, which is also a good outcome, because you don't lose your money, you will probably make some money in the process, and that is fine. But if you haven't executed the idea and somebody else did, you have already lost a little bit there. And if that executor is a big firm with large resources, then you are right in accepting your failure, not because of your capacity or your capability, but just because of timing. But to say that, no, I will fight it out anyway is a fool's dream. You shouldn't do that. You lose money, and it will be very frustrating. So unless you can come up with something, this is the second mover advantage. So the first mover now is the big firm that came up with the idea. The second mover advantage is to observe the first mover and see where he's failing. And if there are some big holes in what he has done, because he's also doing it for the first time, you can take that and fix your startup. So,
okay.
But those issues have to be really critical and fundamental, and things that customers are complaining about day and night. That I want to use this service, but this is just driving me crazy, that kind of stuff. Not that delivery could be faster, and those kind of issues won't fix. Because if you fix those issues and start your startup, that original company is also going to fix them in eventually.
Right.
So you need to have some secret ingredient that you can combat a big company with. If not, it's not worth it. Should move on. When I came out with Motorpause, there was an individual who said that, oh, I had thought of this 2 years ago. This is my idea. And I'm sure that 10 other people came up with the idea, but in the end, it's always going to be who hits the market first, which I think has taught you an important lesson that you can't keep waiting on a concept if you've come up with it. You
Absolutely.
need to take some credible steps to be seen out there and, you know.
Right. Right. So, I mean, if you rightly mentioned that money plays like, an important role in the venture. So usually what happens is until ventures don't get that adequate amount of funding, they themselves put money from their own pocket, or, they borrow from family, friends, etc. But there's a certain point till where they can fund their own venture. So is no money equal to no venture?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. In fact, there are startups out there who have not raised any money from venture capitalists, have put in their own money and have created that startup. And those are the most respected startups um, in terms of success, because success is not getting funding, but success is being able to survive without anybody's help, which is a big deal in entrepreneurship, because when you accept VC funding, you're bound to give away equity, which is a percentage of your company. And as exciting as it may seem at that point, if you raise $1 million and you give away like 30-40%, those investors are going to hold you responsible for a lot of things going forward. They might hamper your creative process. They might control your direction, because you have to put them on the board of directors if they've given you a lot of money, which means that the first example of the startup which you mentioned funds everything themselves and has held it for a long time, that startup is called a bootstrapped startup, and that is the most respected startup because they didn't need any hand holding. They hold 100% of the concept that they set out with. Now, do you have to be that? No, but that should be your ideal. Venture capitalism shouldn't be your first step. It should be your last. It should be the absolute last worst case situation if you don't have money. People go directly to that step because, first of all, they, in the startup culture in India, they think that raising money from venture capitalists is step one to become successful. Incorrect. And most of the companies and startups that do raise capital from venture capitalists get their 2 minutes of fame, get featured everywhere, raised money from SoftBank or Mr. Tata. They just as quickly burn through the capital, become bankrupt very quickly, are not able to sustain themselves, and they die down. So that 2 minutes of fame, literally any startup can get. It's all about convincing power, right? You have to convince a team of venture capitalists how amazing your concept is. If you're a great convincer, you are bound to get that money. Getting money from VCs is not the achievement. That is the first step for you to execute what you set out to do. So it's like you are saying, I'm going to build a car, and getting funding from VCs is just like, here's all the tools that you need. So when you get the tools, do you celebrate because you've already built the car? You haven't yet. You have a whole term ahead where you have to put those tools to use. You have to show what you're made of. You have to show that your concept was worth investing in. And you have to create a sustainable working business model for many, many years, which most startups are not doing in the current ecosystem. They take the funding, they burn through the capital, they declare bankruptcy. Either they get acquired by someone or they just go out of business. And that's not what we need. So that visible aspect of entrepreneurship, the visible aspect of success where you got funding from someone, that needs to dial down a little bit, because getting funding is not the goal, because it's a human element to it. If there's a human being across you, it's all about their convincing power and a little bit of the pitch that you give. And no, it's not always tied to how successful you will be. So getting funding is not a sign or a guaranteed symbol or stamp that this startup is going to be successful. You take that funding and then you show people how you use that funding and how you actually became successful. So that is one big flaw in our system. And there are some very good veteran entrepreneurs out there who refuse to accept VC funding, even if offered, who find new innovative ways to cut down their expenses and keep going as they are and stay 100% their own company. There will be blocks when you will absolutely need funding, and one of the big blocks is scalability. So for example, if you have a very successful business startup, it's in Mumbai, but if you want to explore it in 15 other cities, you won't suddenly have that kind of money. At which point it's fair to say that, yes, I need venture capitalist money or some fund who can help me expand. But if you say I have a concept, I don't have the money, which is why the concept won't work, then the concept is definitely flawed. Or you have not put in enough creativity to bring it into reality, because money will never be the barrier in creating the concept. It can definitely be a barrier in scaling the concept. You can say that I don't have money, so I will have to stick to Bombay. But if you say that I can't even bring it into existence because I don't have money, you're going wrong somewhere. Unless it's like the startup is heavy on capital expenditure, like building stuff and buying shops, in which case you have to think like an entrepreneur with limited resources and think of how I can bypass these expenses and create a concept and then look for scalability. So that is 90% of the mails we get in Mr. Tata's office, which are, I have a concept, but I don't have money. But those are absolutely secondary priorities for Mr. Tata also. He doesn't, if that's the excuse you're giving, then there is something wrong in how you executed the process. But if there's a startup writing that we have a successful idea, here's the evidence, but now we have to take it to 100x level. So we need funding. Now that is something someone can get behind.
I want to give you a hypothetical situation now. If I were to remove all the barriers and constraints that you're facing right now regarding a certain project, be it financial, be it lack of time or whatever, what project would you want to take up?
I think I mentioned it previously, which would be opening a design studio. Mm-hmm. For animation storyboarding, for creating characters and stories, for storytelling, and hiring a bunch of young enthusiastic artists and having a small scale boutique startup. Mm-hmm. But it should be in a more beautiful place, not because of the aesthetic sense only, but because it gives me a sense of fulfillment to be in a beautiful place, to have a garden where an office dog can run around, or we can adopt a couple of strays. That's my ideal environment. If I had a lot of money, I would spend a lot of time into creativity in this animation, storyboarding, and design stuff. I would put together a team of young professionals who are not getting opportunities, and I would put it in a place which is really pretty and large. So that would be the blunt version of what I would want to do as the next project.
Right. Sounds like a wonderful idea.
Yeah.
Right. So again, like a very generic question to you that, I mean, I mentioned this in the introduction as well, that we live in a very superficial world where we idealize certain people. So if you had to differentiate between idealizing or, considering someone as your idol and healthy worshipping, how would you differentiate between the two terms to that point where it starts reducing your individuality?
Healthy worshipping itself is a problematic term, because worshipping implies that you blindly follow someone or you revere them to the point where everything about them is perfect. Even if it is perfect, you should have the context of your own story in mind. So you should say that this person that I'm idolizing has this story. I am trying to create this story. So what parts of the story can apply here, instead of just taking this and dumping it completely on yours? Then it's no longer your story. Your narrative is changed. That sort of thing shouldn't be happening. So for example, if I'm starting out as a startup, I'm idolizing a startup, but I'm specifically looking at this person had a very creative way of reducing the amount of funds he needed in the beginning. How did he go about that? Let me find that out. If you take that and apply to your concept, great. That is something you can idolize and worship. And even outside of entrepreneurship, nobody is perfect. Nobody is that level of perfect where you can idolize them or worship them as such. And as I have mentioned several times in my webinars also, 2020 is a time when we need more different stories, more colorful stories, stories that have parted from the main route, stories that have created something which never existed before. And not just in terms of technology, but in terms of how they are as individuals, as a company, or how their stories are all attached to just being a good person in the end. So we need a lot more of those, and that won't come if you're going to idolize pre-existing stories constantly, because that's just more replication. Fortunately, the tide is automatically turning. Like I said, all of this ties into mental health also, because people want to be happy. Being happy is a priority that people are putting right now. And if you start putting that as a priority, automatically some choices will deviate from what you were supposed to do as per society standards, as per educational system standards, and what you actually want to do, which will give you fulfillment. So I think all of your questions are sort of tying together in this particular answer, where we need different stories, and those won't come if you are constantly going to idolize the point of replication of someone else.
We are living in an economic society where we believe that if you do not work hard, if you're not working hard, and if you're not earning money, you deserve to be homeless, or you deserve to be hungry. And we just assume that this person is not earning money, he's just lazy, and that's how it is, that's how it is supposed to be. And we've just somehow, the humanness of us humans has been extracted out of us because of that. We have lost the sense of kindness, the sense of empathy. What do you have to say about that?
That's a great question, and I like that you gave the hunger context, because um, irrespective of what your economic status is, or even if you are working, not working, whatever it is, um, judging a person's hunger as to whether it's coming from laziness or not, or maybe he's not working, whatever, judging a person's hunger like that is a matter of privilege, and a privilege that you're abusing. You don't get to do that if you have food on your plate. You don't get to do that if you have 2 meals a day. You don't get to prejudice and decide for yourself why this person might be hungry, because hunger has this very innate way of connecting all of us, because it doesn't discriminate. If someone is hungry, it has the same effect on you and me and that person on the street. It's just that we are not so aware of it because we don't go through it. So if you don't go through it, you don't get the right to judge someone else's hunger. And food is something that you don't get to abuse. So if you are giving away money, you can have these hypothetical scenarios in your mind, or is using it for drugs and alcohol or giving it to someone else. Fine. I don't even agree to that, but fine. If you want to do it for money, you can. But with food, you don't get to do that, because the end destination of food is someone's stomach. So there is no process through which it can be misused. And you should not come up with creative scenarios where, oh, they might be selling the food also. No, you don't get to do that. And if they sell it to someone, even then the end goal is in someone's stomach. So hunger is something that connects all of us. And because we are not on that level of hunger, we sort of get insensitized. But how I'm trying to answer this question is, put aside all your hypothetical situations, or even if you don't have empathy, just put it aside. But if someone tells you they're hungry, you absolutely, eyes closed, can buy them and should buy them food. So go for it, because there's 1 to 2% margin of someone misusing food. And even if they do, think about the 98% chance that you're going to put food in someone's stomach. So I think in terms of hunger, even if you don't feel towards that person, the next time someone asks you they're hungry, just close your eyes, blindfolded, give them food. That's what I would suggest.
So, very profound way of answering it. You did it beautifully.
Thank you.
My next question would be, if you could deliver your last 30-second speech to the world, what would it sound like?
Oh boy. I wish I had time to prepare. Like my last 30 seconds or the end of the world 30 seconds?
End of world 30 seconds.
Well, it's not much use then, is it? No time to practice it.
Yes.
Uh, I would just, I guess, I wouldn't put it in speech form right now, but I would just, I guess, whatever I would say, I would emphasize on um, being sensitive to each other. And I don't mean charity, I don't mean social work, I don't mean volunteer work. And sort of those have become the norms of um, how to be a good person in our society, which is great if you're doing it. But there are other standards which are much more important standards of how you deal with someone in your life, how you deal with people who can do nothing for you, how you deal with people who, in our Indian unfortunate class system, are considered to be below you, who work for you. So, having the same standard of treating people for all of these categories and realizing that the rewards that that gives you in terms of satisfaction, friendship, and just your conscience being a really good garden, well gardened place, that fulfillment is something that no amount of success, no amount of milestones will buy you. So how you treat waiters, how you treat someone who can do nothing for you, how you reject someone of help even when you're rejecting, all of these minor things, and how you just behave when nobody else is observing you, that those sort of values are more important on who you are as a person, because everything else is a lie. If in a social setting you're absolutely a kind, generous, and well spoken person, but when nobody's watching, if you're the exact opposite of that, then that's just drama for that person constantly. So there's this very old quote which goes like, character is the person you are when nobody's watching. Because when everybody's watching, everybody's a great person. So I think being a great person isn't about what you're giving away as much as just the treatment of people. So I'm not saying say yes to everybody either, but there's a way of saying no, for example. Those kind of small things go a long way.
Right.
And I think our lack of feeling and sense of belonging to the community is tied to this, online or otherwise. Either we want to bring each other down, or we want to make assumptions about each other. If someone is popular, we want to assume they're a mean person. If someone is successful, we want to assume that they cheated their way there. If someone is kind, we want to say, oh, they're pretending. So all these prejudices have inhibited our capability of being kind and have created another person who thinks that way. So if Dhruv comes to me and says, oh, that person is so kind on the surface, but I bet he's a mean person, automatically I'm thinking that I'm going to say that to someone else, But if Dhruv came and told me that seems like a kind person, I hope that he actually is that person. I guess he is. Then that's what I'm going to carry to 100 different people. So it begins with you. You can't say that everybody's mean, so I have to be mean and strong. So you should start putting out those things in society, in the universe, online, and you will start noticing that it takes form, it snowballs, and it grows. And you might not always see it, but keep putting it out.
Right. So coming to the last question of the podcast, and one of the very awaited questions from our list. If you were in our shoes of an interviewer and you get to ask yourself a question, what would it be and why?
I think the question would be something that I have been addressing in my personal life recently, which is, do you think that I'm asking this to myself, which is, do you think that you got here and are now privileged, or do you think you got here because of privilege, and how do you deal with privilege in general in your life? And that is a great question, because there have been a lot of questions around privilege going around, in terms of, for example, if someone talks about mental health, but if that person comes from a well-to-do background, that person gets attacked on privilege just because they have maybe a fancy car or whatever. And at the same time, it does hold true. There's where there's smoke, there's fire. It does hold true that a lot of privileged community are completely disconnected from the truth about the problems of the world or the authenticity about it, because through their privileged classes they only get to see a virgin. So to put this all at one rest would be, it is okay to have privilege. I have had a lot of privilege in my life. The first step would be to acknowledge it. So let me just acknowledge it and say, I have had the privilege of going abroad for an education. I have had the privilege of having parents who supported me when I was doing different things. I have had the privilege of not being opposed by a lot of people when I was creating all of this. I have had the privilege of being able to pay my student loan installments now. I have had the privilege of coming across Mr. Tata and having him as a mentor. But having acknowledged all these privileges being the first step, you can't just end there. As someone with these privileges or someone else who has more privileges, the second step would be, how can I use this to uplift people who don't have that privilege? And that is the missing step, which is making people hate people with privilege. And that is the step that is disconnecting people with privilege from the real world. If you have that privilege, it has come to you through some form or another. You either earned it or you were given it. Whatever it is, it's not your fault. It's with you now. But if you say that I have this privilege, but I will continue to live in this privileged world and I don't have anything to do with those who are not as privileged, that is where a true problem comes. So to acknowledge your privilege would be your first step, to say that, yes, I have all these privileges, you're right. The second step would be, how can I uplift people who don't have this privilege? And I don't mean give homes to the homeless or give food to the hungry only. I mean someone who doesn't have access. The whole reason I started On Your Sparks was a result of this question answer, because I thought to myself that I can pitch to venture capitalists, or I had access to Cornell's entrepreneurship program, because of which I have this very well-refined understanding of entrepreneurship now. But how are all these people writing to Mr. Tata's office ever going to get exposed to that kind of environment, and who is going to take that effort? So that is where privilege comes in. I have had that privilege, but to say that not my problem, if they don't have access, then I can't do anything. But instead, if you act on something and decide that this is how I can give away my privilege, this is how I can share my privilege, or this is how I can understand those who don't have privilege and help them to come up to my level, that is how you would deal with privilege today. So when someone gets attacked on privilege, if it's you, for example, tomorrow, and say that, oh, you're so privileged being a student of Jai Hind in South Bombay, you can't say all this. Your step shouldn't be to get defensive and say that, oh, but so what, I have it, I'm not going to blame myself for it. Your step should be, yes, you're right, I do have that privilege. Point me to someone who doesn't have that, or is struggling with something that is being a barrier because he doesn't go to Jai Hind, and let me think of ways to help him also. Be it access to jobs, be it getting admission into Jai Hind, you can coach him probably. So not to get defensive about your privilege, but acknowledging that you have it and then using it to bring other people to the same level is how I would sort of tell everyone with and without privilege to approach it. So that's something that's become a very stark contrast, especially in the lockdown, because I had shared this post recently that people keep saying we're in the same boat in this lockdown, but we are not. You and I are in the privilege of the boat of having a house over our head and a job. Then there come people who don't have a job. There are people who have pay cuts. There are people who don't have a house or a job. There are people who have COVID who don't have a house or a job. There are so many levels of privilege in society. And if you are on top, or even if you're in the middle, there's always someone below you you can help. So you should focus on that part and sort of give away your privilege a little bit. Doesn't mean that you're giving away all your money and saying, now I'm also underprivileged. Just means that whatever you have, how can you use that to uplift other people to the same level?
Right. They say you're here for a purpose, and if you have the privilege, it's not for yourself, but it's to use it to uplift the others. So you
Correct.
rightly summed it up in what you just said. So, I mean, that brings us to the end of the podcast. And thank you for being there. We are really grateful to shoot a podcast with you.
No problem.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Please continue.
No, I think it's a great sign in terms of the Indian education system and in terms of how society in general is changing and in terms of your generation in general, that you guys are asking all these questions instead of a bunch of other questions that you could have asked, bunch of other things that you could have been doing on a Saturday morning. So that reflects on you as well. I like that you're self-aware about it and you're trying to put that to good use. So it's been great spending time with you guys, and I hope this helps you and others in whichever way.
It has definitely helped us, and I would like to conclude by quoting one of my favorite books that I was reading last night, rereading last night, Tuesdays with Molly. Love is how you stay alive even after you're gone, which something I think you would relate to, as you said that, you know, if I were to disappear from the face of earth, what am I leaving back? And love is something that you leave back. Love, kindness, empathy, by impacting others' lives. So that is something you're leaving back. So thank you for
That's one of my favorite books, and thank you for quoting that. That does make sense.
Mm-hmm. So yeah.
All right. I look forward to seeing this online.